One of the common topics of discussion in the manosphere these days, especially on such channels as Pete, that guy you refused to invite to gatherings, fantastic channel. If you've not yet subscribed, you probably should. Y'all know how much I adore Pete. Well, is the question of whether or not a person in a different looks category can give proper advice to another person. So, for example, someone who's a 7.5 telling a 3.5 what he needs to do with his life and how he should act, and whether or not that is appropriate. Now, I mention this because one of the topics I think that's incredibly important in general, but is specifically important to me, if I'm perfectly honest, is the topic of mutual understanding and relatability, which is to say, how can we relate to each other? And how can we understand each other? How can we not talk past each other? And how do we get past, above all, that pesky problem of self-extrapolation? You see, to my mind, most of these misunderstandings arise because we are, through no fault of our own, of course, inclined to be naturally lazy in how we approach others in terms of our own thought processes, which is to say, we assume our experience is also reflected in their experience, which is, on the face of it, a bit silly. So, for example, if I were to simply say, well, you know, people are different, everyone would agree. Of course people are different. Individuals are different. Groups are different. Whatever. People would agree to that on average, right? They would say, yeah. But when push comes to shove, when the matter actually needs to be discussed, that's not how people act. People always assume that their experience is the primary experience. And they don't do this out of malice. They do this out of custom, habit, and just a kind of psychological laziness that is, I would say, inborn pretty much in all of us. They will assume their experience is reflective of other people's, which is why, even though it's more likely than not that if a Chad were to tell a sub-5, hey, go do X, Y, Z, that in fact he doesn't really care, well, that's part of it as well. It's part of the lack of effort in wanting to understand. But the assumption, of course, for example, in this case, Chad, is that his experience is the baseline experience for essentially all men, and therefore if they just do as he does, and it should be fine. And this is by no means, and this is why I brought this up, unique to this particular topic or subject matter. This applies to just about every human experience. I have a friend who is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. He's so sharp, his mind is so keen that talking to him creates cuts and gashes on your own skin. I'm obviously being a bit hyperbolic, but he's that smart. And he tutors various subjects, and he never really got, until I taught him basically, he never really got why other people weren't getting the things he was teaching, why it just didn't come naturally to them, why he'd have to spend a lot of time teaching certain subjects and going through steps that were just essentially innately understood by him. And it took a while. You could say I almost trained him, but I made him realize that his experience in the world is not reflective of other people's experience. And this guy, for the record, is literally 3 standard deviations plus above the mean in terms of IQ. So to say his experience intellectually, cognitive in the world is not reflective of most people's experience is a bit of an understatement. I mean, I am a drooling idiot compared to this guy. But I was able to teach him something, which is to say, it took him some time, but he began to realize that, hey, the reason why these other people aren't getting what I'm trying to teach them, whether it's mathematics or linguistics or whatever, is because they don't have the same gray matter as I have. And this sounds like such a trivial thing, but when people are good at things, when things come naturally, above all, when things come naturally, people make all sorts of assumptions. This is, by the way, where the Chad assumption comes from. Some guy who's 6'2", who's an 8.3 in the face, whatever, looks good, works out, nice body. He has a certain baseline assumption based on his own experiences. And he has no reason, technically speaking, to not extrapolate from his own experience, to sort of put himself in somebody else's shoes. He doesn't need to walk the proverbial mile in somebody else's shoes because it's not his experience. The reason why I brought up this other example of my friend and his tutoring, trying to teach people various things, is because it's a different sort of interaction. Chad might occasionally say, look, you just need to shower and work out and work on your personality, when in fact Chad's personality is largely based on his looks. But in a tutoring or teaching situation, you need to communicate to people. And you need to do your best, whatever the circumstances, especially since you're getting paid to teach or tutor, to make sure that people understand the material. But the tutoring situation is different from teaching, because typically people go to tutoring when they need help, which means they're probably weak in the subject or they're just not very good at it or whatever. They need some kind of leg up. Tutoring, you really need to form some kind of rapport. They're there, the individuals in question, because they don't get it. And for all intents and purposes, in the case of this friend of mine, yeah, they're probably dumber than he is. But understanding that they're dumber than he is and taking the appropriate measures is important, right? It's very different in other life situations. The tutoring situation is, in fact, not unique, but fairly unusual, precisely because you do need to form that rapport with somebody, whereas Chad doesn't care. And more broadly, other situations, somebody who had some special weight loss trick that seemed to work for him. And by that, I don't mean some magic pill, but rather something that allowed him to suppress his appetite sufficiently, some technique, whatever. That may or may not work for other people just because it worked for him. Or the countless stories you'll hear about quitting drugs or alcohol and people surprised when other people can't do the exact same thing. In my loser video from a little while ago, I got a weird comment asking me whether or not the person who is about to put drugs in his body with his own two hands, whether or not he's control over it. And this is exactly my point. The baseline assumption is from the self. So fundamentally, what I'm trying to say is virtually every human misunderstanding we have, collectively, but more importantly, individually, is based on that assumption that our own experience in the world, our own makeup, reflects that of others. When you actually grill people on this, it seems stupid, and they would admit that that can't be the case. I'm a 5'8" midget compared to the great 6'4" giant Pete, Lord of Brooklyn. That cannot be the same experience. Just like somebody who's trying to grasp a subject with an IQ of 95 is going to be very different indeed compared to somebody with an IQ of 145. If we could, at least as individuals, break through that barrier that prevents us from at least attempting communication and understanding. Because at the end of the day, as we are all different, as individuals, it will always be impossible to accurately experience what other people have experienced. But you can, however, develop a sense of compassion. You can, however, increase your understanding. Let me give you an example. I've known a couple people during the course of my life who get terrible migraines, headaches basically. Now, I get a migraine about once every year and a half, maybe once a year tops. I don't really get them, very rarely. Now, when somebody tells me they have a migraine and it's crippling them, like I've known people that can't work regularly because of it, because they don't know where it comes from, they just get them. The first thing I have to acknowledge and tell the person is, look, I don't know what you're experiencing. I don't understand it, not really. I don't understand it at the experiential level. However, I can, by way of my insomnia, understand some kind of condition that cripples you. And so it makes more sense to me. Now, it's true, I'm coming from a different angle, in this case, the angle of a different type of suffering, but it would help me understand in these situations somebody with chronic migraines. Whatever the condition might be, it still becomes relatable and therefore evocative of compassion in me and understanding if there's some point of reference, right? And this is what we don't do most of the time. Most of the time, we just assume our experience is whatever. And I have to admit, I find it difficult to imagine because I've had headaches, but never to that degree, possibly. I'm not even sure. I don't know what the experience is like. But if someone says to me it's crippling and they can't work on certain days, I see no reason why they would just make that up. So I'm assuming it is pretty painful and crippling. And it knocks you out of commission. Now, I'm not claiming that you need to understand everybody. And I'm not claiming you should strive to understand everybody. But certainly, for example, your friends or your family members or people you're close to, there too, there will be issues that will arise specifically from this problem of self-extrapolation and inability to extract yourself from the cage of your own experience. And that can be extremely detrimental. I know this, for example, from past experiences with some exes of mine who were always dismayed at my low energy due to my insomnia because they couldn't fathom what it was like to not sleep well. I mean, for people who sleep normally, I obviously bring this up frequently because it's near and dear to my heart and my mind, it's unfathomable to think what that's like, apart from the occasional days where they just, they may have a rough night. It tends to get blurred into the background of all the other good nights that they've had. And from this arose a lot of conflict, laziness, lack of interest in things, you're depressive, whatever. All these things coming from this condition because they couldn't imagine what it was like to suffer from a largely crippling condition. Now, like I said, you don't need to do this with everyone. You don't need to understand everyone. But I do think if you want to understand people that you're close to and care about, it's very important to walk past your own limitations of your own experience and try to at least partly grasp that, hey, this other experience, although I'm unfamiliar with it, could have X effect or could influence this person a certain way. I think the net benefit of this ultimately is much better interpersonal relationships with your friends and family because you're more willing to leave your own domain and explore the domain of others. Anyway, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, so I thought I'd expound on it a bit. It is very important because in a day and age where everyone is told to do X, Y, and Z to fix their problems, how many of those people telling them to fix their problems are really trying to walk a mile in the other guy's shoes or even imagine what that might be like? Very few. It takes a significant degree of thoughtfulness to think beyond that. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Much appreciated. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.